Hi, dear ones. Welcome. Thanks for joining me today. My name is Amy Rose White. Today, I am going to talk about what narcissism really is. Narcissism is a very hot topic these days. It's all over our phones, our Instagram accounts, Facebook feeds. It's in the news, certainly rampant in the political world in terms of using that label to understand and armchair diagnose people. So I'm here to dispel some of the mythology about narcissism, talk about what it really is, and why I think it matters to know. So narcissism is a clinical diagnosis. For those of us who are therapists, we use the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, number 5, to give people clinical diagnoses of mental health disorders. As it stands in the DSM-5, it's a very limited criteria that most people honestly do not meet. A lot of the folks that we're calling narcissists out there actually don't meet the full clinical criteria of narcissism, which generally includes an appearance of inflated self-esteem, grandiosity, the need to be the biggest and the best, and somewhat not really reality-based sense of themselves in terms of being the best at anything or everything, and combined with low empathy, often needing to be the center of attention. So a lot of people might jump to your mind when you think about that type of person, but what a lot of clinicians think of as narcissism actually includes a very wide spectrum of personality types and behavior that isn't in the statistical manual for diagnosing and may not necessarily be even helpful and can be highly stigmatizing for people who are behaving in ways that are the result of trauma. So I'm here to talk in more detail about that phenomenon and why are we needing to identify narcissism and how can it be helpful and what's it really about? How can it not be helpful? Narcissism can have a very wide way that it looks in terms of presentation and symptoms. And frankly, I find it more helpful and honest to talk about narcissistic tendencies, which all of us have. All of us have the ability to be self-centered, self-absorbed, perhaps think we're superior to others, have moments where we have lapses in empathy or consideration for other people. What people talk about as narcissism is usually in the context of describing emotional abuse. And they're not exactly one and the same. So for our purposes today, let's break it down. When we're talking about someone who is a narcissist, or more accurately, is engaging in emotionally abusive behavior in any kind of relationship, whether that's a coworker, a boss, a friend, a lover or partner, or even a child, we're really talking about someone that has a very deep shame wound. And typically those shame wounds start from a traumatic, very traumatic upbringing around at least emotional abuse, which I actually find to be more devastating to personality features than even physical and sexual abuse, as terrible and life-changing as those are as well. So the shame wound results from, it could be abandonment and neglect. It could be outright name-calling, physical abuse, sexual abuse. It can be withholding love from the parent to child, or simply making it very clear that that person is going to be punished in some way if they don't live up to the parent standards. Usually in a very consistently cold, cruel, manipulative way. So I don't believe that babies are born to be emotional abusers or with narcissistic traits. Well, that's not true. Actually, all babies are born narcissists because they're completely egocentric. But in the way we think about personalities, where a lot of the stuff I'm seeing on Instagram is that, narcissists are pure evil and they're trying to destroy you. And some of those behaviors may indeed appear that way. And I'm not going to say that there aren't sociopaths out there who also have a diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder. But when we're thinking about most of us in our day-to-day lives in terms of functioning and discernment of who we want to keep in our lives and who we want to stay really far away from, let's talk about the true nature of the person who is acting emotionally abusive, lacks empathy, is controlling and manipulative, and really can do damage emotionally to you when you're in any kind of long-term relationship with them, including at work. So first was the shame wound, which is really just this fear because of childhood trauma, extensive ongoing childhood trauma, a fear of deep inadequacy, low self-worth, and lack of trust in themselves and in life, a lack of sense of safety in the world, that their needs will be met, that they're okay, that they can trust other people and themselves. So that's the really key part, is the shame wound is number one. The second major aspect of what we might call narcissistic tendencies, people that are walking around in that way most of the time in the world, is the need for control. So that deep sense of inadequacy and inferiority drives the person to take control of their surroundings, their environment, their own emotions, and the behaviors and emotions of the people around them in order to protect themselves from the pain of that sense of inadequacy and, frankly, self-loathing. And when that shame wound is so deep, what happens in the child is we call this splitting in mental health. And the sense of black and whiteness that little kids have, people are either good or bad, it's right or it's wrong, they split off into two halves of themselves where they can only identify themselves as good to defend the deep feeling of shame, which is, I'm bad. So when folks have the need for control, they'll do not so great things in relationships. And it may be really overt and obvious, as in domestic violence perpetrators often, or it may be much more subtle, something people call covert narcissism, where folks will subtly maybe punish a partner or a friend for not validating them in the way that they needed, or for questioning them, or for having needs or being too needy or dependent. It can be very subtle, it can be very overt, but basically they're simply trying to protect themselves from vulnerability. So being in a truly emotionally intimate relationship with someone who struggles with narcissistic tendencies is nigh on impossible unless they have two things, because you have to have both. And for people who have a really tough time with empathy because of early trauma or neurodivergence, maybe someone on the autism spectrum, or simply learning disabled, or attention deficit disorder. Well, there's lots of things that can have people show up with low empathy, or withdrawn or cold. Lots of other things that are not narcissistic personality disorder can make a person engage in somewhat unhealthy or even abusive behaviors in relationship. But the two things that are needed for that person to be able to join you in a healthy way of relating is a willingness and the capacity. And unfortunately, a lot of people who are so deeply wounded in this way might be somewhat willing, but often will lack the capacity for the insight in towards how their behaviors are harmful to people, because it evokes that deep, dark shame wound so greatly, and it's simply too painful for them to bear. Another way of thinking about folks with this dynamic, and that might be you if you're listening, and there isn't anything inherently wrong or broken with you if that is the case. If you're able to take this in, it means you do have some capacity for insight and awareness and a willingness perhaps to change with help, which is possible with the willingness and capacity. But the other way of talking about this is simply extreme emotional immaturity. And those of us that were raised by emotionally immature parents that lacked the ability to see our experience and not just theirs will perhaps struggle with some of the same issues. And again, that extreme emotional immaturity has nothing to do with you when people are treating you poorly, whether it was your parents or your friends or someone you're dating or even a partner that you're married and have children with. That emotional immaturity is simply a stuck place that they are kind of, stuck in. It's a stunted place that they're stuck in. And what is really important to remember about either true narcissism or emotional immaturity or someone somewhere on the spectrum, is that you cannot love someone out of that condition. You cannot change that for them. You cannot give them insight and capacity no matter how you try. And the most important thing for people who are kind of stuck in that black and white childhood place where it's all about them and they are a victim to the world, that's the other key characteristic, is to take care of your own wounding, to take care of your own needs, and ask yourself, if this person isn't willing or seemingly capable of engaging with you in a healthy way or learning the tools to do that, what is it in me, in us, that is allowing us to kind of throw ourselves to the wolves over and over again? And that's a subject for another day. I've done another video a little bit about that. But that's the most important thing, is not labeling and diagnosing people from afar, spending a lot of time trying to figure out why your boss is the way they are, or even why your parents are the way they are, or your partner. That, in my opinion, is a waste of energy, because those folks, unless they're invested in changing, aren't going to change. But you can. You can turn the focus back on you, back on loving you, taking care of yourself, showing up for yourself, taking the basic steps of self-respect. And if you are watching this because you've been involved on some degree historically in your past or in the present now with someone that you're wondering if they're narcissistic, chances are there's some emotional damage that has occurred for you. So my wish for you and my encouragement to you is to reach out for help, to rebuild your sense of reality, to affirm that you're not crazy, that there are people who see you and listen to you. And the very most important person who can do that is yourself. But when you've been surrounded by folks that struggle with these issues, sometimes that takes time and there's a healing path. So I encourage you to reach out to a qualified therapist who specializes in trauma or abuse recovery to work that out and get the support that you need. Until next time, I wish you so well. May you be happy. May you be safe. May you be at peace. Bye.